right. According to the computer, I am streaming. Hopefully, it is working. Hi, everybody. We're back doing a little artwork today. I've been super busy working on a bunch of projects, working on comics, working on some commissions, and this is a piece that I had started a little while ago and decided I would come back to. So this is Red Sonja, for those who don't know, a character that spun out of the Conan comics and that barbarian time of the sort of the 70s when that was really popular in the comics. And of course, Red Sonja's continued for years and years. So here she is. She's beating up a bunch of guys in a tavern, and now she's sitting there and drinking her beverage while they are all moaning and groaning in pain in the background. So there's a couple reasons I wanted to share this. One was I wanted to show folks who are maybe new to art or to especially this style of illustration, some of the tools that I use when I'm doing my inking, some of the processes and my thought process. And then I also wanted to talk to young artists who maybe sometimes are struggling. So this is not the original piece that I started out with. I had another idea originally and took it pretty far. So let me pull that original piece here to show you. So I keep these things just for this reason, so that I can look back and go, okay, what happened? Where did I go wrong, or where did I go right, or whatever the deal was. So originally, I had her. She had a sword, and she was sitting much differently on the bench. So this was the original concept that I had. So if you can see, she's sitting much sort of tougher, leaning forward. The people would have been smaller, covered up more of the background. And I kept going over this and over this and over this. I had to change the legs a bunch of times. I had the feet pointed differently. Eventually I got to the point I didn't like how the sword was, how her arm was not supported by anything and just sort of hanging there. At one point I had done the whole thing and realized that her head was too small and had to completely redraw the head. And after a whole bunch of time of several days of working through and coming back and coming here and coming back, I was like, you know what, this isn't what I'm looking for. And I ended up just starting over and going back and doing that. So the point that I want to make for young artists out there who are doing this, you have a piece and you're struggling, you're like, man, whatever it is, I can't get that face right. I can't get the eyes right. I can't get the background right. I can't get, things aren't coming together for you. The natural instinct sometimes is to just power through it. And I see this a lot where I'll see drawings that people will show me, young artists will show me and be like, you can tell they had the idea and just couldn't quite pull it off, but they powered through and they show you what they got. Sometimes it's better to walk away, think about it, try something different. All it is time, right? It's a piece of paper and some time. That's what I wasted, which isn't a big deal. Because in the end, I'm happier with this whole composition than I was with that one. Is this perfect? No, probably not. There's things that, as it's coming together, I think will work, but maybe I could have done some other things differently here too. Anyway, the point is I'm happier overall with this than I was with that one, so it didn't make sense for me to waste my time just struggling to get through it. So sometimes it's better to just move on and just start over, try something different. I've had pieces that I've put away for years. I had an idea, I started something, came back to it years later and realized this isn't gonna work. It wasn't going to work, came back to it years later with new technique, maybe, a new idea, a new process, things like that, and was able to finally make it work. So real quick, up here at the top, I've got, this is the ceiling, and so I'm going to imagine that there is a wood floor, there's a second story to this. Maybe there's rooms up there or whatever. So I'm going to do some cross planks here that I will eventually texture up as wood, with wood grain, wood texture. So because this is one of the nice parts, because it's wood, you don't have to, you can use a straight edge. You don't have to use a straight edge because wood is it's a natural element. So it's going to have fluctuations to it. I did use a straight edge on these beams, but again, I could have freehanded it. That would have been okay. Same with things like stone, bricks, things that aren't perfect. Good way to do that. So the next step that I'm going to do here is I'm going to fill in some of the black areas where I know there's going to be a lot of solid black. I've erased all the pencils. Sometimes I will, and I may do this, as I will go back in with a pencil and draw in where I want those shadows and put the ink over it. The only problem is that sometimes when you put ink over the pencil, the ink doesn't stick well, doesn't mesh into the paper, doesn't not bleed, but doesn't get into the paper, soak into the paper well with the graphite behind it, and that ink can come up later. So anyway, this is the brush that I'm using. I don't remember the manufacturer, but it's a Japanese brush pen that I like a lot, and it's good for covering a lot of large areas, large to intermediate size areas pretty quick, and then getting the general shape filled in, and then I can come back in with some other pens that I have and close out the details without over inking stuff I don't want inked, and then having to go in and correct it, because corrections never quite work as well as I would like them to. So so the lighting is coming from this direction, from across. So these stones are casting a shadow on the bricks behind them. The inside of these stones will be shadowed, but I'm going to do it with ink lines, because if I blacked in these as well, it would be just as dark as the shadow behind it, and it wouldn't create that sense of depth that I want. So that's why I'm not going to do it that way. Let's see. So I've already got some areas on her that I've drawn where the shadows are going to be, so I know I can fill in some of those areas there. And again, trying to be careful not to overshadow or over ink. It's easier to come back in and add some ink if I want to than it is to remove ink once it's put down. So I gotta be careful about that. There is going to be some, so again, the light's coming this way, so this leg is going to shadow this leg. Be some shading here. There's definitely going to be shading underneath the cuff of the boots. I also have to be careful not to drag my hand through the ink as it dries as well. So, I will definitely be coming back and doing some more once parts dry. So that said, so these are the legs of the table. So the leg of the table clearly is going to be shadowed by the table itself. So we'll have a shadow there. Now, I'm also going to put a shadow on this leg, because it is 100% facing away from the light, but I have to be careful not to obliterate that line, or those two things will merge together, and I don't want that. So this one's going to be at a little bit of an angle, and then this leg will get shaded as well. And then the last one over here, same thing. Now, again, there's some stuff down here. These are the legs of the bench. I could do sort of the same principle here. And then with this brush, all the ink is up in the handle here, so all I have to do is squeeze as the brush starts to dry, and I get some more ink in there. That's that. I know we're going to have the shadow of her foot. Kind of in here. This foot. Under here is going to be shaded. There'll be some shadows that way as well that we'll do. The way I drew it, let's see. That's his knee, so this part under this guy is going to be all blacked out there. This guy's back is going to be pretty shadowed since he's facing away from the light source. So go like that. We could do a little bit here, here, and here. So let's see if I can get my hand here to where it won't make a big mess. This guy leaning across the bar. He's also going to cast a shadow. Where he's hanging over. Okay. So that part is drying out. Let's do what do I want here. This is a Tombow. Oh no, wait, that's not the one I want. It is a Tombow pen I want, though. Here we go. This is the Tombow. Oops. Shoot, I dropped my pen. This is a Tombow brush pen. Pretty much most of the work I'm doing these days is with brush pens of some kind. So this is a kind of fine to medium stiff brush pen. For this one, I have a whole bunch of different other sizes. The line work that I did was all the same. It's all done with the Pigma Micron 01. And then I'll come in and we'll be thickening up specific lines that I want darker to show shading. But for now, for these thick, dark eyelashes, I need something a little bigger. So we're going with this. And then, actually, I have a couple. So around areas that have like hair, things where it's right, very flowy, where it's not very cut and dry, I like to have a softer brush. So this is the other Tombow. These come in a set, the blue one and the gray one, and this one's a little more flexible. So this one I like for either larger areas or like this, like I said, around the hair where I need the pen to sort of flex a little bit to flow with the curves. So we're going to do this. So I hope everybody, again, thanks to everybody who's watching this, whether it's you're watching it today or you're watching it in a replay. I don't apologize. I don't have YouTube up right now to confirm if it's streaming, confirm that you're able to see and hear me. Hopefully you are. And again, if you're live, thanks. If not, I appreciate you checking in down the road as well. So a little bit for the hair, shadow there. so you can see what I'm doing is I like to come in and do as much of the sort of larger blocks of shading first, then afterwards I'll come in and fill in the lines. So I'll do a darker outline around Sonja herself, which will help pop her from the background. Some people will do the lines first and then fill in the shadows in between, inside. I prefer to do it the other way. And one of the reasons is that if I do make a mistake, you could potentially just fix your line weight to kind of cover it up a little bit. So that's how I like to do it. Also, you'll see when I do go back through here, I will be rendering. And so when I say rendering, for anybody who doesn't know, what rendering is this is just a black shadow, but there's a transition between something being solid black and being lit. So like my hand, if you can see my hand, try to find a good shadow. So you can see the shadow underneath here, because I have a light coming from this way, but I also have a light coming this way. So there's shadow sort of runs here, but there's a highlight on this side and the light's on this side. But it's not like there's a hard black line right here. This isn't the solid darkest black shadow that you could ever have. So if you're doing it in black and white art, you have to use black or white. So you have to use black for this, and then what we use is rendering, and what we mean is cross-hatching and lines to show the transition between that darker shadow and the lighter part. So off of where I'm adding these shadows now, I'll also be rendering that out, which again is hatching it and creating value between the dark, the total black and the total white. And I've mentioned this before. If you've seen any of my other videos, this is one of the things that does kind of make me crazy, and it does lead to me not doing as many videos as I would like, is the fact that I'm sitting here working, and normally I would be working all alone. And when you're all alone, you can have music on, or you can have the TV on in sports, or you can have a movie on. I like to watch, have something on in the background that I'm very familiar with, something, maybe a movie I've watched a bunch of times or things like that, so I can just sort of listen along as I go. Unfortunately, when you're recording and you want to use YouTube as your platform, you can't do that because you'll get struck for copyright. So now you get to just at times watch in silence as I proceed to ink this. So either you get to watch in silence, or I have to ramble as I am doing now. So my apologies for the ramble, but it's either that or dead quiet. So hopefully the ramble is better than dead quiet. I try to think of, as I'm going, things that might be interesting or lessons learned or things like that. Here's a lesson learned. Make sure your ink is dry before you put your hand on it, or you will get it on your hand and smudge it around and have to clean it up after, which is a mess. So sometimes when you're inking, you either have to work in areas, a certain spot, like I'm only going to work on this side, or move around a lot. Sometimes that's the other option, is to go, okay, all this stuff is wet over here, so I'm going to work on these guys over here maybe, right? So that's what I'll do, is I'll come over here to where it's clean, and I can put my hand down and ink in these fellas here. If you're a lefty like me and You bemoan the fact that your hand is always inked or full of lead, or you're smearing or whatever. One of the things, it's hard because it's sort of backwards from what everybody else does, but what's worked for me, or what I've learned, is to work from sort of bottom right of your page to the top left. So as you go, you're constantly moving onto a clean space, as opposed to going this way, which pretty much everybody else does because they're right-handed. So when we go like this, we just smear everything across. So for you lefties out there, it's a little bit of a change in what you've got to do, but I do recommend working in a backwards direction, if you will, opposite direction, like you're Australian. Things are upside down and backwards, right? Or Japanese, where they read, right? They read from right to left. So we can do it. We can do it, lefties. We can make it happen. So hopefully there are some folks out there who are enjoying this, folks who have, maybe you got some new art supplies for Christmas. Maybe you got some new inking supplies for Christmas, and you're excited to check those out and see what it's all about. So here's an inking video, maybe to get you motivated, to get you inspired. Now, most of the stuff that I've been working on lately has been more superhero based. I have in the past done quite a bit of fantasy, Dungeons and Dragons, barbarian fantasy style projects. It's not what I'm working on at the moment, but sometimes it's nice to come back and do something like that is different than what you're working on today. I find that taking that break sort of in that direction. So if I was working on fantasy stuff, every once in a while I might need to step aside and just draw a superhero piece, just to keep those, because it's different sort of art muscles that you're going to use, things you're going to draw. It's the same concepts, but it does get to be a different feeling. So if you're doing a lot of, like I said, if you're doing a lot of superhero stuff, maybe you want to switch it up sometime and do some of this stuff. Or you're doing a lot of, I don't know, maybe you're drawing, pirates or military, right? Maybe you're doing a lot of soldiers, a lot of military stuff. Maybe you want to then do some cowboys or some gangster or crime noir. Like I said, just superhero things. If you're an illustrator, I find that it helps to keep from getting bored with whatever it is that you're working on for the day, to sometimes just do something a little different and flex some different muscles, and you can come back to the board refreshed after you get that project out of your system. So just a thought, something that has worked for me. Here, so this guy has long hair. Let's fill in some of his long hair. So again, thanks so much for checking this out. Again, this is just something that I needed to do to, as I said, sort of step away for a minute and do something a little different. The primary work that I've been doing for quite some time has really been superhero based. I'm working on a book. It's a series. I don't know. In the old days, they used to have different names for it. Sometimes they would call it mini series. Sometimes they would call it maxi series. I don't know, or just series. I don't know. This particular book does have a complete beginning, middle, ending. So it's a finite piece. There may be spin-offs of it, certain characters, certain stories that we want to do, but this what I'm working on right now does have a beginning, middle, and end, and it's called The Just, and we're very excited. I'm working with Terry Sala as the writer, and it's a project we've been working together and crafting and sort of building this world, this superhero world together for a number of years to try to get it just right. And we're super excited to get it out to folks. The first issue has been completely drawn, and I believe the script, when I say the script, I mean the dialogue portion of it has all been completed. And so we are getting ready at the beginning of 2023 to launch our first Kickstarter program to crowdfund the money that we will need to actually print this and get it into your hands. So essentially what you do, if anybody's unfamiliar with Kickstarter or Indiegogo or any of these other platforms, is you're basically just pre-ordering. Very popular model with a lot of things. Even big retailers will do pre-orders right nowadays. So what you do with Kickstarter is essentially you're pre-ordering my comic. You're saying, I'm going to purchase this for X number of dollars, and we get the money, and that helps us print the copies that we need to fulfill to you. But the difference is you also get added bonuses by supporting people on Kickstarter. So not only are we going to provide you with a copy of the comic, but you may get multiple copies of the comic. So if you're a collector, a comic book collector, you may be into variants. Variants are, it's the same comic book inside, but things like the cover are done typically by different artists. So with this one, you could get a cover by me. We're also getting a cover drawn by another artist, a friend of ours, Matt Weldon, a professional artist, and he's doing an amazing cover, which I think is going to end up being a wraparound cover. So, wraparound being both the front and back of the book. Super, super cool. So when you pre-order the book, you could also go with that option, so you can get multiple copies. We're also going to be doing trading cards of the hero characters because there's so many of them in our story. So you're going to be able to collect all of the trading cards. If you're an art fan and you like original art, there's going to be a tier where you could buy the comic and buy a page of original art. We've talked about doing a blank cover option where you could get a head sketch of your favorite character on there. So there's a lot of things that you could do beyond just pre-purchasing the comic itself to really increase the experience for you as a backer. So that's the term everybody uses, is a backer. So you're backing this project. You are supporting our venture and our goal and our artistic dream by essentially pre-ordering, but getting more than you would if you just went into a store and bought the comic. So we have all these plans together. There's a process that we have to do to lay it out. We have to do some pre-promotional work, meaning we have to have, there's a video that we need to put together and things of that nature, and then it gets submitted and it has to get approved. But so that's going to be coming soon. We wanted to wait until after the holidays and then get it out to everybody. And like I said, we couldn't be more excited to have that coming out soon. We had originally planned on doing it before the holidays. I've mentioned it in a couple of my videos before, and we realized that we would really, for two people who have never done it, Terry and I have both worked on things I think that have been involved in Kickstarters, but we've never run our own. And so we realized trying to get it done before the holidays was going to be really rushing it, and we definitely didn't want to do that. We didn't want to come in unprepared, put it out there, and then not be able to make, fulfill to the promises, or just, not be able to offer folks the best options or the best product available. So we are, we're working with people to get the best printing, the best printer options that we can. Things like you have to make paper choices and cover stock choices, and there's a lot of operational things that go into making a comic that you don't realize until you start to get neck deep in it, and all of a sudden you're like, oh boy, this is harder than I thought it was going to be. So anyway, that's where we are at, and like I said, that's going to be coming out in the beginning of 2023, and we're both super excited to get it into your hands. Let's see. I want something slightly smaller. So as opposed to a brush pen, I'm going to just go with a regular pen, which is what we call our dog Penny. We call her Pen a lot. There we go. So you can see now, hopefully, I know it still looks kind of weird, but we're starting to get some of the larger areas filled in, starting to build the shadows, and the shadows build the form, right? So otherwise it's very flat, and it's hard to tell depth, like what's in front of what. You can, with just line work, you can look at what crosses over in front of what. You could tell that she's larger in the frame than the people around her, but even so, having the shadow and the dark areas, the shading, helps build it to become a much more three-dimensional image. So hopefully you're starting to see how that's coming together here. And I have too many pens to pick from. And I do have them normally, a lot of times I do have them organized. I swear, I have very, very cool things that I've been gifted over the years. So I have several of these things where I put them together by size and type and stuff like that. But when I get working, I find I end up holding a whole bunch in my hand at one time and just sort of picking out of that, or creating a pile next to me and picking out of that as I go. So you can have all of the organizational tools in the world, but if you don't use them, hey, they don't do a lot of good. So every once in a while I have to force myself to clean up, put everything away, start over, get it all where it's supposed to be, and then you'll be able to find it when you want it, right? That's what I tell my daughter that all the time. Do I listen to my own advice? Sometimes. Probably not as much as I should. So here we go. We've got this shadow underneath the thigh muscle there, because I want this to pop out to help create that roundness. So I'm not going to shadow here up above that much, because even though the light's coming, it would hit this part first, then this. So that would be something that might be done in color. If this got colored, I might put a little bit of a darker skin tone right there, but I don't want it the same as the underneath of this shadow, because the light's actually hitting the top of a surface as opposed to the bottom of a rounded surface. That makes sense. That's something that you see. I've made that mistake myself. You see that mistake in young artists a lot, is they'll go, well, there's a muscle, so I'm going to shade on both sides of the muscle. But you can't shade on both sides because the light's only coming from one way, unless you clearly have multiple light sources, which you can. It's just a lot harder to render, and you have to really keep in mind if the light's hitting from here and here at the same time, it really can be very confusing in terms of where your shadows need to be. So this is another brush pen. This one's just a lot larger. This is, I don't know what this is. This is a zebra brush pen. And you can see that it's just got a much bigger tip to it, so you can kind of fill in larger areas as needed. And a lot of this ink here is that I put down originally is dried out, or is dry-ish, dry enough, let's put it that way, so I can put my hand over the top. That is one of the big differences too between the brush pens like this, like, you know, an actual pen versus one of these. So this ink is more like dipping a pen in a bottle of ink and then putting it, or a brush in a bottle of ink and doing it, which lots of people do. More pros do that than use this. I just am not that good with a brush. So, and this is a lot cleaner. But this is going to stay wet, or, you know, or damp. I will say wet longer than a brush, though you can still, or the brush stays wet longer than the pen. Let's put it that way. There's more ink put down. The pen stuff you can touch pretty quickly, it'll dry. However, you can still smear your pen lines and pen shadows and pen marks if you're not careful. So just because it looks drier doesn't mean that it is. So just be aware. Especially, you know, the obviously the larger the pen, the more ink you're putting down, the wetter it's going to be, the more likely you are to smear. There we go. And you notice, so even though the bricks back here, so the bricks are in shadow, but you notice that I left the mortar lines. So this is a technique I like to do. I could just completely make that solid black, and then you'd see the mortar lines out of it. Perfectly reasonable way to do it. I like to do it this way just because it still shows the overall flow and where the bricks are and that kind of thing. Just a personal preference. So, and not necessarily, it wouldn't be something that would make sense for every application, or for, you know, for every piece that you're doing. You might have something where you want to go completely black on the shadows on the bricks, but I like leaving the mortar lines. Same thing you'll see eventually here as we get to like this. Like, so these are wood panels. As I shadow the wood panels, I like to leave what that was supposed to be. I like to leave the seam between the boards visible as well. So like if this shadow would normally touch, but I like to leave that space between the boards, and then that way it still reads as its separate boards as opposed to just a big black mass. The other thing that I'll do when I come back to it eventually, I'm like, what did I draw? Oh, yeah. That's his arm. When I come back to it is I can go back with white, probably not so much here, but probably on the table where the wood grain would be, and where the wood grain goes into shadow, I can add white wood grain so that you still see that it still reads as wood, and it doesn't read as a shadow on the figures. Again, another trick I like to do that I'll show you when I get there. That may not be today in this video. So here's an example, right? There's this seam in the table of the two boards that make up the table. That hand is casting that shadow. So I've left that seam. That's one of the things that I like to do. Let's go do this. And this edge of her boot is all kind of, it's old, it's raggedy, it's been chewed up. So it doesn't matter if you get the ink a little messy, because it just adds to that look, which is what I want. Down to the ankle a little there. All right, coming along. The other thing you'll see, not only is it because the ink is wet in spots, and I don't want to smear it, but you'll also see me move around a lot. And I've noticed a lot of folks that do that. I don't think it's just me. There may be people that ink incredibly methodically. I also do sort of drawing as well, just in general. Like you'll work on that leg and then kind of bounce over here to the table and bounce around. I don't know if it's just a natural instinct of a way to keep things interesting or what, but yeah, I do tend to bounce around. You'll see, right, like just there. I'll move my eyes around and notice something and be like, oh yeah, that needs a shadow over there, and I'll go in and start working on that part for a little bit, and then next thing you know, your eye catches something else and you bounce over there and start to fill that in. So I don't know. It's just, like I said, it could just be me, but I don't think so. I've seen other artists, and I feel like they do sort of the same thing. I feel like it's more common for that to happen than to work super linearly, like from piece to piece. Of course, we work sort of front to back, because you have to draw what's overlapping stuff in the background. So there we go. There we go. So let's get the bigger pen out. Again, it's wood. This is the leg of the table, the back leg of the table coming down. Is it? No, it's the front, this corner leg of the table coming down. So again, that shadow doesn't have to be nice and clean and straight, right? It's going to bend and move through the texture, the natural texture of the wood. So having a little bit of messiness, a little bit of movement in there is okay. Nothing wrong with that. My phone is buzzing. Who's buzzing my phone? Oh, no big deal. Alrighty. So I think for the most part at this point, probably the major shadows on Sonja are done. So what I'm going to do is I could normally go further and do a lot more of the big shadows. There's stuff on the floor. There's these figures down around her feet, the far background, things like that. It's the table. But what I want to do is I want to show you, because I'll probably wrap this up in a little bit, because this will be several hours of work to do. I want to show you a couple more things, a couple more techniques, and I want to show you the what it looks like, the line weight that I put around the outside of the figure. So this is another zebra pen. This one is a slightly smaller brush than the ones you saw before. So this is a zebra pen. This is, you see the difference. Well, they look about the same size. This one's a lot more flexible. And then this one is larger, right? So you can see it's bigger, fatter. this one I really like for this kind of stuff. So, because I can get thin or thick out of this pen as I need it. So again, the light's coming this way. So the outlines, contour lines of her body and objects are going to be thicker away from the light than on the side of the light. So I want to kind of play with that. Likewise, I'm going to do a fairly, even on the light side of it, I'm going to do a decent outline around her mug o' beverage. Again, to sort of push it forward from her so it doesn't blend into her hand or the background. I want that to pop. And typically the closer something is to the eye of the viewer, the larger that outline is going to be. Because it's clearer, things in the distance have less line weight, less outline around them. So I'm going to really emphasize that this is in the foreground. And that's going to help create even more depth. Everything, you know, this foot is in front of this, which is in front of, you know, this is in front of the hand, is in front of the guy, is in front of the brick. So everything's creating layers of depth, and that's important in a 2D media. That's what you want to emphasize. And anything that's away from the light is going to get a fairly thick outline. You can see where all I have to do, it's just about how much pressure I put on this pen is going to fluctuate that line. And that's why I like the brush pen, right? That's what it gives me, is that ability to push down and get thick, heavy line, or to lighten my touch and get a nice thin line. So this is underneath her rim, so that's going to be fairly dark because it's on that side. Get the hair going. So we want to get the main figure here really separated out from the background. So one of the things you'll notice as well is there's this shoulder pad here, the shoulder guard, whatever, and I didn't use the same outline on that as I did the rest of it. So this is a separate object. It's not connected to her. She's holding it. So I've outlined this. This, I will thicken this line to help separate it from the hair behind it, but I don't want as thick a line as I'm doing as this outline, because the outline's job is simply to pop her from the background. The interior line, I want to have some different line weights in to sort of play with where it is. So if I put the same line here that's around this, it puts them in a similar plane, whereas obviously this is in front of her hand, which is in front of her arm, which is behind this. So you got to play around with some of that line weight. So if the light's coming this way, this side of the hair is going to be, this little curl is going to be dark, and then this is going to lighten up because the light's actually going to hit the top of her head. And then on the back, it's going to go thicker again. So this is where I'm going to go easier, which is hard because again, if you've seen any of my videos, I've mentioned this before, I have what I refer to as a heavy hand. I tend to bear down with my tools when I draw or when I ink, and I think it's just to help steady my hand. It's just a habit that I've picked up over the years, and so it's definitely harder for me to have a consistent light touch. But it's like everything else, it's about practice. So that's going to be a little thicker underneath. And the difference here is I'm not trying to like, it's not night and day. What I mean is like the outline on the light side and the shadow side, it's not like triple thick on one side versus the other, right? It doesn't need to be. It could be relatively subtle. Or the other thing that I can really do if I want, which again, it's always easier to add. So see the ink on this side versus the line on this side. Or like I said, right here, this is catching light. This is not catching light. So that's the difference, is like this line to this line. It's not huge. I can always go in and beef either line up by adding ink. I can come in and make this line a lot thicker if I want. Same with like here. If I feel like that, I want to push that back, thicken up the line. Underneath here, thicken it up. It's easier to thicken a line to add to a line than it is to remove from a line. So always remember that. So better to err on the side of caution and go, oh, I didn't go hard enough on that line. Let me go back and beef it up. So, here we go. So that idea of being able to, or what I should say is, knowing where the light source is coming from is how I drew it. That's how I knew how to draw in the shapes of where these shadows would be on the figure, on Sonja. So here's what I could have done. I could have drawn these same lines and just started out and drawn them thicker from the get-go, right? I have lots and lots of pens. Instead of drawing with the Micron 01, which is a very thin line and thin pen, I could have drawn the outline with this, which is this Faber-Castell Pippen medium. So it's a lot thicker line. I could have drawn these lines thicker to start with. Why didn't I? Is a question. The answer is that way I can adjust it as I want. So I've come back in. Yes, I have to come back in and essentially redraw all the outlines. But that's okay because I get to do it the way I want it, the way I feel makes sense. If I do it at the beginning and I make a mistake, again, you can, there's correction stuff. There's white ink and correction pens and stuff like that. But boy, it never works fantastic. So that being said, I prefer to go in, even though I have to redraw the line, I'd rather redraw the line like this to do the outline than I would do it incorrectly the first time. So is it a little extra work? Yes. Does it make sense for me? Yes. And again, I've mentioned this before. Again, I keep saying, if you see my other videos, you will know. And this is there. There is always more than one way to skin a cat. So if you find that drawing with a darker, thicker outline to start with works for you, by all means, go for it. There's no wrong way. This is just how I do it, and so this is what makes sense for me. So I'm sharing in the case that whoever's watching this looks at it and says, let me try that, and goes, oh wow, that really worked for me too. But there's, as long as you're putting marks on the paper, there's no wrong way to do it. So let's see here. So as you can see, I'm starting to do some of the interior ink lines here. Again, now to separate some of the elements, the belt, the belt buckle, the straps on the leg, stuff like that. I want that curve of the leg is in front of the boot that wraps around. So I want to do that. Same down here. A little darker on this side. The glove. Where the hair overlaps. I'll do some of this. Okay, so there's definitely more details to do here. Oh yeah, like I said, there's rendering. Let me I'll show you a little bit about what I'm talking about when I talk about rendering, for anyone who's not sure. You hear the term, but you don't know what it means. Let me actually show. I kind of explained it earlier, but let me go ahead and show you what that means, and then we'll go ahead and we'll wrap up for today. So let's see here. Let's do it with some of this, with the brick. Let me zoom in a little bit here on the brick so you can see. There we go. Okay. So the brick has this shadow, and I mentioned that this part here wants to be shadowed, but I don't want it as dark as that. Theoretically, if you're thinking about how the light would come in, the light would come this way, this brick would be really dark as well. But I want it casting a shadow, and if I make this as dark as this, then it all looks the same. So what I want to do is render this shadow as opposed to blacking out the shadow. So what I'm going to do is come in and just do some lines, some vertical lines. And the way that vertical lines read, or I say vertical lines, any lines that are close together read as a gray tone. Especially if you leave it as black and white. If this piece gets colored, then you may end up losing some of this line work. Meaning, so let's pretend this is a brick color. So this is going to be sort of a brighter red brickish color, reddish brown. I'm going to put a darker reddish brown under here. That may cover up some of the lines. That's okay. If that's the way it goes, that's fine. The point here is I don't draw for color. I draw for this to live as a black and white piece of art forever, so that whoever ends up, whether it's me, maybe I keep it, maybe it ends up in somebody else's collection, they can look at it as a black and white piece of art, and all of the imagery works in terms of separating the space, the objects, the depth, all of those things. So anyway, I'm going to render these bricks here with this. So now I'm going horizontals to follow the direction of the brick. So meaning if I started up and down here, it's radiating like a pie, like a circle, like a clock. so that it's going to tip along, right? So, and now what I should do is rotate the paper to make it easier on my hand to go in the direction, but it's going to screw up the camera, so I'm going to try to do it this way, which is a little unnatural. So that brings me to a whole nother topic tangent for young artists. Find your angle. So what I mean by that is, let me get this over here. Everybody has a way that your hand goes. Some people draw like this. Some people draw like this. There's people that draw like this. Whatever way your hand goes, there is a motion that is going to be the most natural for you. So for me, I tend to draw like this, more upright, kind of the same way that I write is the way that I draw. So for me, my hand wants to go this way, or I can pull down this way, but you see, I can't quite pull as far. So for me, this is the more natural line to make. So that means if I have lines that I want to go this way, instead of going like this, where I can only go so far, I want to go this way, I would simply rotate my paper and do my lines. Okay? So knowing which way your hand wants to go and which way your lines go, don't be afraid to rotate your paper to make it make sense. So then if I want to cross over, so I started this way and my lines are like this, and now I want to cross hatch them, which is adding another layer in the opposite direction to add more depth. I'm going to turn my paper back over, and now I'm going to go this way. And then when you turn it back, now I have a relatively, well, it's okay. But the idea is that it's hatched and everything is going, the line movement, the line weight would be similar. If I tried to do it like this and then tried to go like this, it's not going to feel the same because I can't get the same spacing, the same flow, the same move. So in essence, practice your hand motion, your line movement, and know what works for you. And then when you're drawing, most of the time, I'm leaving it like this for the camera, like I said, so that I'm not moving the image around. But most of the time you want to be moving the paper to a position that's most comfortable and natural for your hand placement motion to be. Okay? So that's a way that I would do that over here on these bricks. And then just sort of clean up this edge. Of where the edge of the brick is. Okay? So that's how I would show that this inside edge of these stones is darker than the outside, but not as dark as that shadow. Okay, here's the other thing I would do. I'm going to go to a slightly smaller pen. And I'm going to take and sort of feather out this shadow as well. And again, what this does, the line is simply trying to make a transition from solid black to solid white, because you know that that's not how light works. The shadows don't stop hard and have a finite hard edge. It bleeds. Even try to see if I can cast a shadow. Okay, so this shadow, it's not great. It's not hard. It's my hands between the light and the page, and you can see it's very soft. So you want to soften some of the edges. Now, I say that, just like everything in life I've found, you go, what I preface everything with is it depends. I say this constantly throughout almost every day. Somebody asks me a question about anything and I go, well, it depends, because that's the truth, right? There's very few hard and fast rules about anything. You can use very hard edge shadows if you want. Things like metal, hard edge shadows look much better on metal because it's what we think it is. It's very, especially shiny stuff. It makes it look more, I guess, unnatural. But when you have things like people, materials, stone, wood, stuff like that, there's much fewer hard edge shadows. Now, if you want to see how you do work with just hard black, just edge shadows, look at Mike Mignola. Mike Mignola is an artist, for anybody who's not aware of who Mike Mignola is. And he created Hellboy. And he works in very, very graphic shapes of shadows. There are panels that are almost entirely black with just splotches of color to break it up. It reads very flat, but you can see what he's doing and you can see the depth. He can create space and distance in a panel with just black and one color sometimes. It's really amazing stuff, and it's a style that he has really mastered. But it's not something that everybody can do, and it's certainly not a naturalistic approach to lighting, shading, but it is incredibly artistic and incredibly expressive, and I do highly recommend looking for any student of art of any kind to look at Mike Mignola's work because of the way that he does that. Okay, so what I did here, let's see, we go in. Sorry, I do have to go at a little bit of an angle. So what I did was first I came down in one direction and then I cross-hatched that because it's so hard, the black is so hard, one line wasn't going to give me enough of a transition. So I needed to cross-hatch to go 2 lines, which is going to give it, that's going to read as darker. And then what you do is you ease up and increase the spacing and the let me try to say the spacing and the I can't think of the right word. The number of lines. So the spacing is larger and the number of lines that you use is fewer to sort of fade them out, and that creates that transition from across from solid black to white. And if you want the more specific or the more detailed you want it to be, you can crosshatch more and more and more and more and more. Again, if I was to color this either by hand with markers or digitally, if I got into really, really fine cross-hatching and really feathered this out and really made this transition, you would lose all that line work. You wouldn't be able to see it. So this serves the purpose as kind of a glyph or it tells the eye this is a transition from this to this without it having to be a perfect transition from solid black to solid white. That's all. So there we go. So that is rendering, and you could do the same thing on any other shadowed part of the drawing, including the figure. The only thing about shadowing on the figure is you do want to be careful about how much you do. You don't want, especially, you want materials and things to look different than brick or wood, so you don't want to render so much that it looks like it ends up looking like burlap. So if you know what burlap, it's a weave of fibers, and you don't want someone's skin to look like burlap. So I tend to do a lot less rendering on a figure, especially like I said, skin than I would on a brick or wood or some other thing. Now areas like this of her leg, right? You've got, this is where the knee and then the shin bone comes down, and there's going to be a shadow on the back side of that. So I'm going to do that. And then same thing, I'm going to render in a little bit on this side because the light's coming around. I'll do the same thing down here. Definitely want to go easy on rendering on the face, because it ends up looking like wrinkles as opposed to shadows, and you don't want, especially your main female characters, you don't want them, if they're young, you don't want them looking wrinkly and old, and this is definitely not supposed to be an old character, so we're not going to do that. But some areas like here, we're going to do that. So sometimes here where I don't want a hard shadow, so she does have a shoulder muscle. She has muscles. You know, women, men, kids, even everybody has some musculature, except for maybe babies. Babies are just squish. But everybody has some sort of musculature underneath their skin, regardless of their shape. But you don't want to necessarily have a hard shadow. If I had a real hard shadow, that would make it look like she had this gigantic arm and the light was blocked by the shadow. So that's why I didn't put black underneath there. I just did some lines, again, to sort of read as more gray than a solid hard black. Same thing here. We're going to render that out a little bit there. Again, just all you're trying to do with rendering is just create that transition from a solid black to where the solid white is. And it could be a lot or it could be a little. And one of the hardest things to do is to know when to use a lot and when to use a little. So there we go. Do a little bit of this, and yeah, that's going to be about it for today. I did want to make that while I'm thinking of it, so I don't forget. This is black here. Right here. So you can see I sort of drew in some rendering to start with, meaning that the lines here on the belt, because I knew this part would be darker, are going to come and fade out as it gets towards where the light is hitting it. On the underside, sort of the same thing. So I had kind of pre-drawn that in for myself in that area. So thank you all, anybody who checks this out. I really appreciate it. I will continue as we get to the new year. Hopefully my schedule will allow me to stream more, both live and pre-recorded. Of course, as I mentioned, I will be having my at least one new book, new comic coming out sometime in the early part of 2023. Very excited for you to see it, to get your hands on it. I have another comic that's in the works that is almost 100% completed as well, and when that's ready, I'll announce that. That's one that's all on my own, and I'm looking forward to launching that Kickstarter program as well. So thank you all for the time. I greatly appreciate it. Here comes the awkward part, because I have to go over here to where my computer is to stop the stream. So I'm going to step away. But thank you all. Have a great day. Enjoy yourselves. Have a happy new year. and look forward to talking to everybody more in 2023. Thanks.